New South Wales Treasurer Dominic Perrottet joins me now. Thank you for your time, Treasurer.
Evening, Sharri.
In New South Wales, we've been in lockdown now for over 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks for parts of Sydney. There are now still 100 cases a day. Has this lockdown worked, do you think?
Look, the numbers are obviously stubborn and they're stabilising, but ultimately we want to see them get lower. And, it's pretty clear that this variant is more contagious than the Alpha variant from last year. So ultimately we want to put measures in place that ensure that those numbers decline over time. And the faster they do, the quicker we'll get out. And look, there are always the challenges that come along the way during this pandemic, but at least from our perspective, we're not seeing an exponential increase as we've seen over the course of last year. We're certainly seeing them stabilise, but we really want to see them come down. That's why we've made some recent changes, which we think will hopefully over the next 5 days or so see those numbers reduce substantially.
Given they have been stable at around 100 cases a day, for over a week now, your government must be looking at what has gone wrong here. What is the assessment? Well,
what's most important is not the judgment of the day. The judgment is how you come out of it. And you look at the data and the health advice that you're given at a point in time, and you make an assessment off the back of that. Ultimately, we want it to be in a position where we would have been out of the lockdown faster, but we want to do whatever we can to ensure that happens. At the same time, but we've also got to be aware, we said from the outset, this is not just a health crisis, it's an economic crisis too. We've got to look after people's jobs, keep businesses going, put a substantial amount of support to help our businesses through what is a very difficult time. And we've gone through the last 18 months that has been a substantial challenge, and we certainly came out the other side of that, recovering all the jobs. The economy was stronger than it was coming in.
And that has been remarkable, and I'm going to come back to other economic support that you might be looking at in a moment. Before that, I just want to go to a cabinet discussion that took place the week Sydney did go into lockdown. You were the only cabinet minister to oppose the lockdown. Why did you oppose it? What was your reason for opposing it at the time?
Well, that's an unsubstantiated media leak, Sharri, and what I won't do is go into discussions that occur in Cabinet, particularly reports which are taken out of context. But this view.
So that was untrue. You didn't oppose the lockdown.
Well, I'm not going to go into Cabinet discussion, Sharri, but I'll say this: there seems to be this view that's carried out in the media these days that we should all abscond our responsibility as ministers and hand it over to departments. And that the departments should make all the decisions. We should have a dictator-like approach to government these days. My experience of being a cabinet minister, the best cabinet decisions are made when ideas are tested, when different perspectives are examined. There is generally good and robust discussion, and at the end of those discussions, we all land in a position which we think is the right approach to take going forward. And we have done that ever since I've been a cabinet minister. And numerous times the position changes, other times it doesn't change. But ultimately, getting different perspectives and different ideas at the table leads to the best development of public policy. And one of the things that's really shocked me during this pandemic is this expectation that you would have an unelected member of the department walk in and say, here it is, this is what we're doing. I find it incredibly strange.
Well, do you think that the medical experts or people like Dr. Kerry Chant don't have the best information about what the state should do when it comes to whether to lock down or not?
No, not at all. And what we see with health advice, which we examine very closely when that comes in, and if you look as well over the last 18 months, we also examine the economic consequences of the decisions that we make. And I think that balance and the examination of the evidence that we have in front of us has set New South Wales up and arguably our nation up for great success over this period of time. And I believe that a continuation of that approach will ensure that New South Wales comes out of this stronger on the other side. And if you look at the numbers,
Treasurer, I just want to ask on that point, because there is strong criticism now that New South Wales didn't go into lockdown early enough, and that the highly contagious Delta virus has taken hold and got to this point where we're now in a prolonged, extended lockdown. Do you think your position in Cabinet that week was wrong, and do you think New South Wales should in fact have gone into lockdown earlier than the Premier eventually did put the state into lockdown?
Well, I'm not accepting the ultimate premise in your question, Sharri, that I had a position in Cabinet, because we don't discuss what in relation to your proposition, because we don't discuss what occurs in crisis Cabinet. What I will say is that we have always taken on board and followed the data and the evidence provided to us by the Chief Health Officer. And ultimately, even if you look at the decision that we took yesterday, it was a very challenging decision for the government, but ultimately it was off the back of the advice that Dr. Kerry Chan provided us, and the examination of that advice and the decisions off the back of it.
But Treasurer, you've just said that you wouldn't always follow the health officials' advice. Do you think it was a mistake not to lock down earlier, given we are now in this extended lockdown that is hurting business and people now, if they're in the southwest or west of Sydney, can't even go to their jobs if they're out of that local government area? So do you think it would have been better to have a shorter, sharper, earlier lockdown?
I think that we've always got the balance right here, and the proposition that somehow that there was advice from the medical officers and the health team in our state to lock down and the government took a different approach is completely false. So I'm not sure where that perspective is coming from. What I would say is that we want to get out of this lockdown as quickly as possible. We know that businesses are hurting. We know people are struggling, and that's why we provided enormous support to do that. But we are completely focused as a team and as a government to ensure that this lockdown ends, and our policies demonstrate that. And as I said at the start, I'm not interested in the judgment of the day. What we're focused on is making sure that we come out of this lockdown and our economy is stronger than ever. And if at the same time, we keep people safe. And I think if you look at the health record, not just of New South Wales, but every state and territory in this country, we have done that incredibly well compared to other jurisdictions around the world.
Look, just very quickly on a couple of other points about this, Labor is now, and Chris Bowen this morning on Sky News was indicating that, or calling for a form of JobKeeper to be provided to people who are unable to work now, particularly in southwest Sydney. Is that something that you're looking at or discussing with Josh Frydenberg?
Well, we had those discussions in obviously when the lockdown was extended here in New South Wales. We believed that, well, I certainly thought, and the Premier agreed, that the JobKeeper program would be something that, if installed again here in our state, would have provided strong assistance to business and workers and really kept that connection, which I think is one of the successes of the federal government's policy last year. Now, they took a different view, and we sat down and worked pretty hard on putting together a package with. But
given the restrictions, have now changed and people can't get to their jobs if they do live in that local government area in southwest Sydney, do you think that conversation needs to be revisited?
Well, given the nature of the change, it's something we can always look at. But I think where we landed with the support package from the state and federal government, we put in $4 billion, they put in $1 billion to assist businesses and individuals going forward. In many ways, those issues have been addressed. There's substantial financial assistance provided by the Commonwealth Government for workers who have had their hours reduced. And in terms of assisting New South Wales businesses right across the board with cash flow, there's a number of business packages and payroll tax relief that we have. And if many workers have had those hours reduced, they can stay on the books of their employer, achieve that financial assistance at the Commonwealth level, while at the same time remaining connected to the business. And I think that the cash flow support that we provided on our own, and also the additional support with the Commonwealth, will assist those businesses with overhead costs as we move through this period of time. And for the Commonwealth package with New South Wales, that starts on week 4, which is tomorrow, and goes for the entirety of the lockdown period.
Treasurer, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us on a Sunday evening.
Thanks, Sharri.